The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1887, and Helena Zimmerman knew before she even opened it that her life was about to change forever. She stood on the porch of her ranch house, the paper trembling in her calloused hands as she read the words that seemed to blur together. Notice of eminent domain, railroad expansion, 30 days to vacate. The wind swept across the Nevada plains, carrying dust from the distant mountains that ringed her property like ancient sentinels. Her father had built this ranch from nothing 20 years ago, when Piotr was still a wild mining town filled with desperate men and broken dreams. He had died 6 months earlier, leaving her alone with 2,000 acres, 100 head of cattle, and a stubbornness that ran deeper than the silver veins in the hills. Helena crumpled the telegram and stuffed it into her apron pocket. She was 24 years old, and she would be damned if some railroad company was going to take away everything her father had bled for. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the trail leading up from the southern pasture. A rider approached, silhouetted against the morning sun, and Helena shaded her eyes to get a better look. She did not recognize the horse, a tall roan gelding that moved with the easy grace of an animal well-trained and well-loved. The man in the saddle sat straight-backed, his hat pulled low, and as he drew closer, Helena felt her breath catch slightly in her throat. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His face was weathered but handsome, marked by days in the sun and wind. When he removed his hat, she noticed the way his gaze swept over the property with an appraising intelligence that suggested he saw more than just land and livestock. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and touched with a Texas drawl. "I am looking for the Zimmerman Ranch. Would this be the place?" "It would," Helena replied, keeping her voice steady despite the turmoil churning in her chest. "I am Helena Zimmerman. What business brings you here?" "Name is Preston Brooks," he said, swinging down from his saddle with fluid ease. "I heard in town you might be looking for help. I have been working ranches since I was 14 years old. I can rope, brand, break horses, and mend fence. I do not drink to excess, I do not gamble, and I show up when I say I will." Helena studied him carefully. She had hired 3 men over the past month, and all 3 had quit within 2 weeks, uncomfortable taking orders from a woman. Preston Brooks looked capable enough, but there was something else in his eyes, something she could not quite name. It looked almost like understanding, as if he knew what it meant to fight for something that mattered. "I pay $30 a month plus room and board," she said. "The work is hard and the days are long. I expect honesty and loyalty, and I will give you the same in return." "That sounds fair to me," Preston said. He extended his hand, and when Helena shook it, she felt the calluses that matched her own. His grip was firm but not crushing, respectful without being tentative. "There is something you should know," Helena found herself saying, though she had not planned to mention the telegram to anyone yet. "The ranch is in trouble. The Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company has sent notice that they are claiming this land for their expansion route. They are offering compensation, but it is a fraction of what the property is worth. I have 30 days to fight it or lose everything." Preston's expression grew serious. He did not release her hand immediately, and Helena felt an unexpected warmth spread through her palm. "Then I reckon you could use someone who knows how to fight," he said quietly. "My father lost his ranch in Texas to a similar scheme 5 years ago. The railroad men came with their lawyers and their legal papers, and they took everything he had built. He died 2 years later, a broken man. I swore then I would never let that happen to anyone else if I could help it." Helena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear she had been carrying since she opened the telegram. She had been preparing to face this battle alone, as she had faced everything since her father's death. But standing here in the morning light, looking into Preston Brooks's earnest eyes, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps she did not have to. "The bunkhouse is behind the barn," she said, finally releasing his hand. "Get yourself settled and then meet me in the main house. We have work to do." Over the next 3 days, Preston proved himself worth every penny Helena paid him and more. He rose before dawn and worked until after sunset, never complaining, never shirking. He fixed the broken water pump that had been giving Helena trouble for weeks. He repaired sections of fence that had fallen during the winter storms. He worked with the horses in a way that was gentle yet firm, and Helena found herself watching him when she should have been focused on her own tasks. But it was in the evenings, when they sat at her kitchen table reviewing documents and legal papers, that Helena truly began to appreciate what Preston brought to this fight. He could read and write well, unusual for a ranch hand, and he had a sharp mind for strategy. "The railroad is claiming eminent domain based on public necessity," Preston said on the third night, holding up one of the official letters that had arrived that afternoon. "But look here at the proposed route. They are planning to run the line along your southern boundary, not through the middle of your property. That means they do not actually need to take the whole ranch. They just want it because your land has water rights." Helena leaned forward, studying the map he had spread across the table. "The spring that feeds into Willow Creek," she said slowly. "It is the only reliable water source for 20 miles in either direction." "Exactly," Preston said. His eyes met hers, and Helena felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with railroad companies or legal battles. "If they control your water, they control the entire region. They can charge whatever they want for access, and every rancher and farmer for miles around will have to pay." "So what do we do?" Helena asked. She heard the weariness in her own voice and hated it. She had promised herself she would not break, would not show weakness, but the weight of this fight was heavier than she had anticipated. Preston reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. The gesture was simple, almost unconscious, but it sent a shock through Helena's entire body. "We fight smart," he said. "We find a lawyer who knows railroad law and who is not afraid to stand up to the Pacific and Southwestern. We gather evidence that they do not need the full property for their route, and we make enough noise that they cannot just roll over us without people noticing." "Lawyers cost money," Helena said quietly. "I have savings, but not much. If we lose, I will have nothing left." "If you do not fight, you will have nothing left anyway," Preston pointed out. His thumb moved slightly against her knuckles, a gentle stroke that made her pulse quicken. "And you will not be fighting alone. I told you, I know what it is like to watch a railroad company destroy everything you love. I am in this with you, Helena. All the way." The use of her first name, spoken in that low Texas drawl, made something warm bloom in Helena's chest. She turned her hand over beneath his, palm to palm, and squeezed gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know what I did to deserve your help, but I am grateful for it." "You are fighting for what is right," Preston said simply. "That is all the reason I need." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the table, the lamp casting warm light over the scattered papers. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon, and somewhere in the darkness, the cattle lowed softly. Helena felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in months. Not just hope, but the stirring of something deeper, something that had nothing to do with ranches or railroads and everything to do with the man sitting across from her. The next morning, they rode together into Piotch. The town had changed since its wild mining days, but it still retained an edge of roughness that kept strangers wary. The main street was lined with weathered buildings, their false fronts faded by sun and wind. The Silver Strike Saloon still did brisk business, and the general store displayed goods behind dusty windows. But there were also signs of civilization creeping in. A church with a white steeple, a schoolhouse, a telegraph office that connected Piotr to the wider world. Helena guided her mare toward the office of Thomas Wendell, the only lawyer in town. She had met him briefly at her father's funeral, and he had seemed kind enough, though she had no idea whether he would be willing to take on the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company. The office was small but tidy, with bookcases lining the walls and a desk stacked with papers and law books. Thomas Wendell was a man in his middle 50s, with gray hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He rose when Helena and Preston entered and gestured for them to sit. "Miss Zimmerman," he said warmly, "it is good to see you again, though I suspect this is not a social call." "No, it is not," Helena admitted. She pulled the crumpled telegram from her pocket and handed it to him. "The railroad is trying to take my ranch. I need to know if there is any way to stop them." Thomas read the telegram carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he set it down and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Eminent domain cases are difficult," he said slowly. "The law generally favors expansion and development, especially when railroads are involved. They bring commerce and connection to remote areas. Judges tend to be sympathetic to those arguments." "But there has to be something we can do," Preston interjected. "The railroad does not need the entire property. Look at their proposed route. They could run the line along the boundary without taking more than 100 acres. Thomas picked up the documents Preston handed him and studied them with growing interest. "You have done your homework," he said approvingly. "You are right. If we can prove that the railroad is claiming more land than is necessary for their actual purpose, we might have grounds to challenge the scope of the taking." "Might," Helena repeated. She heard the desperation in her voice and forced herself to remain calm. "I need more than might, Mr. Wendell. I need a real chance." "There is always a chance," Thomas said gently. "But I must be honest with you. This will be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. The railroad will bring in their own lawyers, experienced men who specialize in these cases. We will be fighting an uphill battle." "I have been fighting uphill my entire life," Helena said quietly. "What matters is whether you are willing to take the case." Thomas studied her for a long moment, and then his gaze shifted to Preston, who sat beside Helena with the solid, steady presence of a man who would not be moved. "I will take your case," Thomas said finally. "Not just because it is the right thing to do, though it is, but because I have lived in Piotr for 20 years, and I am tired of watching big companies roll over the people who built this town. Your father was a good man, Miss Zimmerman. He deserves better than to have his legacy stolen by men who care only about profit." Relief flooded through Helena so powerfully that she felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to show weakness, but Preston must have noticed because his hand found hers beneath the table and squeezed gently. "Thank you," she managed to say. "What do we do first?" "First, we need to gather evidence," Thomas said, pulling a fresh sheet of paper toward him and uncapping his ink bottle. "I need documentation of your water rights, surveys of the property, and any correspondence you have had with the railroad company. I also need to research recent eminent domain cases in Nevada to see if there are precedents we can use." "How long will that take?" Preston asked. "A week, perhaps 2, Thomas said. "The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now in the district courthouse." "That does not give us much time, but it will have to be enough." They spent the next hour going over details, and by the time Helena and Preston emerged back into the bright Nevada sunlight, Helena felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. The battle was real now, no longer just an abstract threat, but a concrete fight with specific strategies and goals. "We need supplies," Preston said as they walked toward the general store. "If we are going to be spending time preparing for this hearing, we cannot afford to keep making trips into town." Helena nodded, grateful for his practical thinking. Inside the store, they gathered flour, sugar, coffee, and other essentials. While Helena was selecting fabric for a new shirt, she became aware of whispers behind her. She turned to see two women she recognized from church, Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Cole, watching her with expressions of poorly concealed disapproval. "I heard she is living alone with that new ranch hand," Mrs. Patterson said in a stage whisper clearly meant to be overheard. "No chaperone, no propriety. Her father must be turning in his grave." Helena felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Preston appeared at her elbow before she could speak. "Begging your pardon, ladies," he said with exaggerated politeness, "but Miss Zimmerman is fighting to save her home from being stolen by a railroad company. I would think decent Christian women would offer support instead of gossip. Unless, of course, you would prefer to see her lose everything so you can feel superior about your own moral standing." The two women gaped at him, faces reddening. Mrs. Patterson huffed indignantly and turned away, dragging Mrs. Cole with her. Helena stared at Preston, torn between mortification and a fierce, warm gratitude. "You did not have to do that," she said softly as they carried their supplies to the counter. "Yes, I did," Preston replied. His jaw was tight with anger, though his eyes were gentle when they met hers. "You are fighting hard enough without having to deal with small-minded people who have nothing better to do than tear others down." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who are beginning to understand each other without needing words. Helena found herself acutely aware of Preston's presence beside her. The way he sat his horse, the line of his shoulders, the occasional glances he sent her way when he thought she was not looking. That night, as they worked together preparing dinner in her kitchen, Helena realized how natural it felt to have Preston in her space. He moved around the room with easy familiarity, as if he had been there for years rather than days. He chopped vegetables while she tended the stew, and they talked about everything and nothing. His childhood in Texas, her memories of her father, the books they had read, the dreams they carried. "I always wanted to have my own ranch," Preston confessed as they sat down to eat. "Not to be rich or powerful, but just to have a place that was mine, a place where I could build something lasting." "What stopped you?" Helena asked, genuinely curious. Preston was quiet for a moment, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Fear, I suppose," he said finally. "After watching my father lose everything, I could not bring myself to risk that kind of pain. It seemed safer to keep moving, to never put down roots deep enough to hurt when they got torn up." "But you stopped here," Helena pointed out softly. "You could have ridden past my ranch and kept going." "Why did you stay?" Preston met her eyes across the table, and Helena saw something raw and honest in his gaze that made her heart pound. "Because when I saw you standing on that porch, reading that telegram with your whole world falling apart around you, I saw someone who was not going to give up without a fight," he said quietly. "And I realized I was tired of running, tired of being afraid. I wanted to be the kind of man who stays and fights for what matters." "And what matters to you?" Helena whispered, though she thought she already knew the answer. "Right now," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion, "you do. This ranch does, making sure you do not lose what your father built." That matters more to me than anything has mattered in a long time." Helena felt tears threatening again, but this time she did not fight them. One escaped, rolling down her cheek, and Preston reached across the table to brush it away with his thumb. The touch was unbearably gentle, and Helena found herself leaning into it, craving the comfort and connection it offered. "I am scared," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I am terrified that I am going to lose everything, and I do not know if I am strong enough to survive it." "You are the strongest person I have ever met," Preston said fiercely, "but you do not have to be strong alone anymore. Let me carry some of this weight with you. Let me help you fight." "Why?" Helena asked, though it came out as barely more than a breath. "Why do you care so much?" Preston stood slowly, never breaking eye contact, and moved around the table until he was standing beside her chair. He offered his hand, and when Helena took it, he pulled her gently to her feet. "Because somewhere between that first handshake and right now, I started falling in love with you," he said, his voice low and intense. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I cannot help the way I feel when I look at you, Helena. You are brave and stubborn and beautiful, and I would fight the whole damned railroad company with my bare hands if it meant keeping you safe." Helena could not breathe, could not think, could only stare up into Preston's whiskey-colored eyes and feel her heart crack wide open. "I do not know if I know how to love someone," she whispered. "My father was everything to me, and when he died, I thought that part of me died too. I thought I would just focus on the ranch and the cattle and surviving, and that would be enough." "And is it?" Preston asked gently. "Is surviving enough?" Helena thought about the past 6 months, the loneliness that had settled over her like a heavy blanket, the way she had thrown herself into work to avoid feeling the gaping hole her father's absence had left. And then she thought about the past few days, the way Preston's presence had brought light back into her world, the way she caught herself listening for his footsteps, watching for his smile. "No," she admitted. "It is not enough. I want more than survival. I want to live." "Then live with me," Preston said, and his hands came up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "Fight with me. Build something with me. I am not promising it will be easy or simple, but I swear to you, Helena Zimmerman, I will stand by your side through every challenge and every joy for as long as you will let me." When he kissed her, it was like coming home. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding, and Helena felt herself melting into his embrace. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Preston made a low sound of pleasure that sent heat curling through her belly. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, and Helena lost herself in the sensation of being wanted, being cherished, being seen in a way she never had before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably slow down," he said ruefully. "I do not want to do anything that would damage your reputation or make you uncomfortable." Helena laughed, surprising herself. "My reputation is already being shredded by Mrs. Patterson and her ilk. And as for comfort, Preston Brooks, I have never felt safer or more comfortable with anyone in my life." "Even so," Preston said, though his arms tightened around her as if he could not bear to let go. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly with respect and honor. You deserve that." The old-fashioned sentiment should have felt stifling, but instead, it made Helena fall even harder for this complicated, honorable man who had ridden into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. "All right," she agreed softly. "We will do this properly. But Preston, I am falling in love with you too, just so you know." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, bright and warm and utterly transforming. He kissed her again, sweetly this time, a promise of more to come. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Helena and Preston worked from dawn until late into the night, gathering documents, organizing evidence, and preparing for the hearing. Thomas Wendell visited the ranch 3 times, reviewing their materials and coaching Helena on what to expect in court. Preston proved to have an unexpected talent for research, uncovering information about the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company's other land acquisitions that revealed a pattern of aggressive expansion tactics. But even in the midst of the stress and uncertainty, Helena found moments of pure happiness. Preston was true to his word about courting her properly. He brought her wildflowers he found growing in the high pastures. He sat with her on the porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. He held her hand when they rode out to check the cattle, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her palm. And when he kissed her good night each evening before retreating to the bunkhouse, it was always with a reverence that made Helena feel precious and protected. They also grew to work together like a well-oiled machine. Preston seemed to anticipate what Helena needed before she asked for it, and she found herself doing the same for him. They developed a shorthand of glances and gestures that spoke volumes without words. Helena caught herself thinking about the future, imagining what it would be like to run this ranch with Preston as her partner in every sense of the word. 5 days before the hearing, a sleek black carriage arrived at the ranch. Helena and Preston watched from the porch as 2 men in expensive suits climbed out, followed by a third man whose bearing and cold eyes marked him as someone accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Zimmerman," the third man said, removing his hat with false courtesy. "My name is Cornelius Ashford. I am the chief legal counsel for the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company. I would like to discuss your situation with you." "There is nothing to discuss," Helena said coolly. "I have retained a lawyer and we will see you at the hearing." "Now, do not be hasty," Ashford said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I am here to make you a very generous offer. The railroad is prepared to increase our compensation by 20% if you will sign the papers today and vacate within 1 week." "The answer is no," Helena said flatly. Ashford's smile faded. "Miss Zimmerman, I do not think you understand the reality of your situation. The railroad will have your land one way or another. We have the law on our side, and we have resources you cannot begin to match. By fighting us, you are only wasting money on legal fees and delaying the inevitable. Take our offer. Walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else." "This is my home," Helena said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "My father built this ranch from nothing. He is buried on that hill overlooking the creek. I am not walking away from his legacy because you want to line your company's pockets with stolen land and water rights." "Stolen is a harsh word," Ashford said, his tone hardening. "We are acting entirely within the law." "Within the letter of the law, maybe," Preston interjected, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Helena. "But not the spirit of it. You are claiming eminent domain for a route that does not require taking the entire property. You just want the water rights so you can control this whole region." Ashford's cold gaze shifted to Preston, assessing him with the calculation of a predator sizing up potential prey. "And you are Preston Brooks, Miss Zimmerman's ranch manager." "I see," Ashford said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Tell me, Miss Zimmerman, is it wise to take advice from a ranch hand? This is a complex legal matter requiring sophisticated understanding. Mr. Brooks has more integrity in his little finger than your entire company has combined," Helena snapped. "And I trust his advice far more than I trust yours. Now I would appreciate it if you would leave my property." Ashford replaced his hat with deliberate slowness. "You are making a mistake, Miss Zimmerman. The railroad always wins these battles. Always. I will see you in court, and when the judge rules in our favor, you will walk away with nothing but your pride. I hope you find that comforting when you are homeless." He turned and stalked back to the carriage, his associates following in his wake. As the carriage rolled away, Helena found herself trembling with anger and fear. Preston pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage that always clung to him. "He is trying to scare you," Preston murmured against her hair. "Do not let him win that way." "What if he is right?" Helena whispered. "What if the railroad always wins?" "Then we will be the exception that proves the rule," Preston said firmly. He pulled back just enough to tip her chin up with his fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I believe in you, Helena. I believe in us. And I believe that justice means something, even in a world that often seems unfair." His faith steadied her, gave her strength to push back against the fear threatening to overwhelm her. "You are right," she said, taking a shaky breath. "We have come this far. We are not giving up now." That night, they sat at the kitchen table going over their case one more time. Thomas had assembled an impressive array of evidence. Surveys showing that the railroad's proposed route only required a narrow strip along the southern boundary. Testimonies from neighboring ranchers about the importance of Helena's water rights to the entire region, and documentation of the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company's history of aggressive land acquisition tactics in other states. "We have a solid case," Thomas said, tapping the stack of papers with satisfaction. "But I must be honest with you both. Judges in these cases are often sympathetic to railroad expansion. We need to make our arguments so compelling that he cannot rule against us without looking corrupt or incompetent." "No pressure then," Helena said wryly, though her stomach was churning with anxiety. "You will do fine," Thomas assured her. "Just tell your story honestly. Let the judge see what this ranch means to you, what your father sacrificed to build it. Make it personal and real, not just abstract questions of property rights." The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. Helena woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green wool that her father had bought her 2 years ago for Christmas. When she came out of her bedroom, she found Preston already waiting, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt she had not known he owned. He looked breathtakingly handsome, and the way his eyes lit up when he saw her made Helena's heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said softly, offering his arm. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Helena replied, trying for levity though her voice shook slightly. They rode into Piotch together, arriving at the courthouse an hour early. Thomas was already there, pacing the steps with nervous energy. Inside, the courtroom was austere and intimidating, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. The judge's bench loomed at the front, and Helena felt very small as she took her seat at the plaintiff's table. The railroad's lawyers arrived precisely at 10, a team of 4 men in expensive suits who exuded confidence and arrogance. Cornelius Ashford led them, his expression coldly triumphant as he took his seat across the aisle. The courtroom began to fill with spectators, ranchers and townspeople who had heard about the case and come to watch. Helena recognized many faces, including Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Cole, who whispered behind their hands. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Whitfield," the bailiff announced, and everyone stood as an older man with white hair and sharp eyes entered and took his place behind the bench. "Be seated," Judge Whitfield said. "We are here today to consider the case of Zimmerman versus Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company, a challenge to an eminent domain claim. Mr. Wendell, you may begin." Thomas rose gracefully, and Helena felt Preston's hand find hers beneath the table, squeezing gently. She drew strength from his touch as Thomas began to lay out their case, his voice clear and confident as he explained the railroad's overreach, the importance of the water rights, and the devastating impact that losing the ranch would have not just on Helena but on the entire region. "Your Honor, this is not simply a case about property," Thomas said passionately. "This is about whether a corporation can seize far more land than it needs simply because it has the resources to do so. The railroad's own documents show that their route requires only a narrow corridor along the southern boundary of Miss Zimmerman's property. Yet they are claiming the entire 2,000 acres, including the only reliable water source for miles. This is not eminent domain for public good. This is corporate greed masquerading as progress." When it was Ashford's turn, he rose with the smooth confidence of a man who had won countless similar cases. "Your Honor, the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company is bringing vital transportation and commerce to this region. Our expansion will create jobs, connect communities, and drive economic growth. Miss Zimmerman's attachment to her property is understandable but ultimately irrelevant to the question of public good. The railroad requires not just a corridor but also support infrastructure, maintenance facilities, and access to water for steam engines. The scope of our claim is entirely reasonable and necessary." Back and forth they went, arguments and counterarguments flying like arrows in a battle. Helena found herself gripping Preston's hand so tightly her fingers ached, but he never complained, never pulled away. He was her anchor in the storm, solid and unwavering. Finally, Judge Whitfield held up his hand for silence. "I would like to hear from Miss Zimmerman herself," he said. "Miss Zimmerman, please approach the bench." Helena's legs felt like water as she stood and walked forward. She was acutely aware of every eye in the courtroom on her, judging her, weighing her. But when she glanced back at Preston, he gave her a smile of such warmth and encouragement that her spine straightened and her voice steadied. "Miss Zimmerman," Judge Whitfield said, his tone not unkind, "tell me about this ranch. Why does it matter so much to you?" Helena took a breath, centering herself. "My father came to Nevada with nothing but hope and determination," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He was not a wealthy man or an educated man, but he was honest and hardworking. He spent 20 years building this ranch, clearing land, digging irrigation channels, raising cattle. He taught me everything he knew about ranching, about integrity, about fighting for what you believe in. When he died 6 months ago, I promised him I would protect what he built. This is not just property to me, Your Honor. This is my father's legacy, my home, and my future. The railroad does not need the entire ranch for their route. They just want to control the water so they can profit from it. I am asking you to see through their justifications to the truth underneath. I am asking you to let justice mean something more than whoever has the most money and the best lawyers." The courtroom was utterly silent when she finished. Judge Whitfield studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shifted his gaze to Ashford. "Mr. Ashford, I have reviewed your proposed route. Miss Zimmerman and her attorney make a compelling point. Why does the railroad require the entire property when the route itself only crosses the southern portion?" Ashford rose smoothly. "As I stated, Your Honor, we require support infrastructure and water access. Could that infrastructure not be built on a smaller parcel?" the judge pressed. "Theoretically, perhaps," Ashford admitted carefully, "but the cost and complexity would be significantly higher. It is far more efficient from an engineering and economic standpoint to acquire the entire property." "More efficient for the railroad," Judge Whitfield observed dryly. But what about the efficiency and economic impact of displacing Miss Zimmerman and disrupting the water access for other ranchers in the region? Ashford's confident facade cracked slightly. With respect, Your Honor, the law allows for eminent domain when it serves the public good. The railroad's expansion serves that purpose. Perhaps, Judge Whitfield said, but the law also requires that the taking be necessary and that the property owner receive just compensation. I am not convinced that taking the entire ranch is necessary when a smaller parcel would suffice. And I am certainly not convinced that the compensation offered adequately accounts for the water rights and the disruption to the local economy. Hope flared in Helena's chest, bright and almost painful. She glanced at Thomas, whose expression had shifted from tense to cautiously optimistic. I am going to take this matter under advisement, Judge Whitfield announced. I will review the evidence and issue a written ruling within 1 week. Court is adjourned. The bang of his gavel seemed to echo through Helena's entire body. She stumbled back to the table where Preston waited, and the moment she reached him, he pulled her into a fierce embrace, heedless of the watching crowd. "You are magnificent," he whispered against her hair. "Absolutely magnificent." Thomas joined them, grinning broadly. "That was the best outcome we could have hoped for," he said. "Judge Whitfield is clearly skeptical of the railroad's claims. I think we have a real chance here." The next week was the longest of Helena's life. She tried to focus on ranch work, on the familiar rhythms of feeding and tending and mending, but her mind kept circling back to the courtroom, replaying every moment, every word. Preston was endlessly patient with her, distracting her with stories and affection, holding her when anxiety threatened to drown her. On the 6th day, a rider arrived from town with a message from Thomas. The judge had issued his ruling, and Thomas wanted them to come to his office immediately. Helena and Preston rode into Piatch at a gallop, hearts pounding, fear and hope warring in their chests. Thomas was waiting on the steps of his office, and the smile on his face told Helena everything she needed to know before he even spoke. "We won," he said simply. Judge Whitfield ruled that the railroad may acquire a corridor along the southern boundary for their route, but the rest of the property remains yours. He also ordered them to pay triple the original compensation for the land they do take and to ensure continued water access for all neighboring properties. "It is a complete victory, Helena." Helena's knees buckled and Preston caught her, holding her upright as relief crashed over her in waves so powerful she could not breathe. She was laughing and crying at the same time, clutching Preston's shirt while he pressed kisses to her hair and murmured words of love and pride. "Your father would be so proud of you," Thomas said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You stood up to one of the most powerful railroad companies in the West and won. That is no small thing." "I could not have done it without you," Helena managed to say through her tears. "Both of you." "Thank you does not seem adequate, but thank you." That night back at the ranch, Helena and Preston celebrated quietly. They cooked a simple meal together, but the food tasted better than anything Helena had ever eaten. Everything felt sharper, brighter, more vivid now that the crushing weight of fear had been lifted. She kept catching Preston's eye across the table, and each time the heat in his gaze made her flush with awareness. After dinner, they walked out to the porch and stood looking at the land spread out before them in the fading light. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and the creek sparkled as it wound through the valley. "I have been thinking," Preston said quietly, his arm around Helena's waist. "Now that the ranch is secure, I should probably look for my own place. I have saved enough over the years to make a down payment on a small spread." Helena's heart clenched painfully. "You are leaving," she whispered, though she knew she had no right to ask him to stay. Not leaving, Preston corrected quickly, turning to face her fully. Just trying to do things properly. You said yourself that people are talking about us living here together. I do not want to damage your reputation any further. I do not care about my reputation, Helena said fiercely. I care about you. I care about waking up knowing you are nearby, working beside you every day, falling asleep with the sound of your voice in my ears. Preston, I do not want you to get your own place. I want you to stay here with me, as my partner in every sense of the word. Preston's eyes darkened with emotion. Helena, are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I love you, Helena said, her voice trembling but sure. I am saying that I want to marry you if you will have me. I am saying that this ranch is not complete without you on it. You helped me save it. Now help me build something even better than what my father left behind. Build a life with me, Preston, please. For a moment, Preston just stared at her and Helena felt panic flutter in her chest. Had she been too forward? Had she misread his feelings? But then he was kissing her, deep and passionate and full of a joy so pure it made her dizzy. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet. Yes, he said hoarsely. Yes to all of it. I will marry you, Helena Zimmerman. I will build a life with you. I will love you every single day for the rest of my life. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Piach, with Thomas Wendell standing as witness and half the town in attendance. Even Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Cole came, though they still whispered behind their fans. Helena did not care. She wore a simple white dress she had made herself with wildflowers in her hair, and when Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were shaking with emotion. I love you, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. I already know I did, Helena replied, and kissed him to the sound of applause and cheering. The months that followed were the happiest of Helena's life. She and Preston worked the ranch together, true partners in every sense. They expanded the herd, improved the irrigation systems, and built a new barn to replace the one that had been falling apart. Preston proved to have a gift for horse breeding, and soon, ranchers from surrounding areas were coming to buy his stock. But it was the small moments that Helena treasured most. The way Preston always had coffee ready when she woke in the morning. The way he would catch her around the waist and dance with her in the kitchen while dinner cooked. The way he read to her in the evenings, his deep voice turning simple words into poetry. The way he made love to her with a tenderness and passion that left her breathless and complete. A year after they married, Helena realized she was pregnant. She told Preston on a warm summer evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock giving way to wonder, giving way to fierce protectiveness. Are you sure? He asked, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. I am sure, Helena said, covering his hand with her own. We are going to have a baby, Preston. He pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I am going to be a father, he whispered, sounding awed and terrified in equal measure. I do not know if I know how to do that. Neither do I, Helena admitted, but we will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else. Their son was born on a crisp February morning in 1889. They named him William, after Helena's father, and from the moment Preston held his son for the first time, Helena knew her husband had found his true calling. He was a devoted, attentive father, patient and playful and endlessly loving. Watching him with their baby made Helena fall in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to prosper. The railroad, true to Judge Whitfield's ruling, had built their line along the southern boundary without further encroaching on Helena's property. They had even built a small depot nearby, which brought new opportunities for selling cattle and horses. Helena and Preston became known throughout the region as fair dealers and skilled ranchers, and their reputation drew workers and business. 2 years after William was born, Helena gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Emma. The house that had once felt empty and echoing with loneliness was now filled with laughter and chaos and love. Preston built additions to accommodate their growing family, and Helena marveled at how much her life had changed since that terrible morning when the telegram arrived. On a warm evening in the spring of 1892, 5 years after they met, Helena and Preston sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. William was chasing the twins, all three of them shrieking with laughter. The cattle lowed contentedly in the distance, and the creek sparkled in the fading light. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Helena asked, leaning against Preston's shoulder. "If you had ridden past that day instead of stopping? If I had given up and sold to the railroad?" "I think about it sometimes," Preston admitted, his arm tightening around her. "But then I look at this, at our children and our home and our life together, and I cannot imagine any other path. It feels like destiny, like I was always meant to end up here with you." "I feel the same way," Helena said softly. "You saved me, Preston, not just the ranch, but me. I was so lost and alone, and you gave me hope and love and a future I never dreamed was possible." "You saved yourself," Preston corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of standing beside you while you did it. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known, Helena. I am honored to be your husband." Helena turned in his arms and kissed him, long and sweet and full of the love that had only grown deeper with time. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. "Thank you for stopping that day," she whispered. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for fighting with me and loving me and building this life with me." "Thank you for letting me," Preston replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy with nothing to offer but his heart and his hands. You and these children are everything to me. This ranch is everything to me. I would fight 100 railroad companies if it meant keeping you all safe and happy." As the sun set over the Nevada plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Helena felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. Her father's legacy was secure, not just in the land he had claimed, but in the family she and Preston were raising. The ranch that she had fought so hard to save was now the foundation for something even more precious, a home filled with love and laughter and hope for the future. The Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company's attempts to steal her land had seemed like a disaster at the time, but in hindsight, Helena could see it as a blessing. It had brought Preston into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. It had taught her that she was stronger than she knew, and it had given them both a purpose to fight for, a cause that had forged their partnership in fire and made it unbreakable. Over the years that followed, the ranch continued to grow and thrive. Preston's horse breeding program became famous throughout Nevada and beyond. Helena diversified their operations, adding sheep and eventually even experimenting with some of the new agricultural techniques that were being developed. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, good years and lean years, but they weathered them together, their love and partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. Their children grew up knowing the value of hard work, the importance of fighting for what was right, and the power of love that endured through adversity. William inherited his father's way with horses and his mother's fierce determination. Sarah developed a sharp mind for business and mathematics. Emma had her father's gentle heart and her mother's stubbornness. Together, the three of them ensured that the Zimmerman Brooks ranch would continue for generations. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Helena back to the spot where they had first kissed, at the kitchen table covered with legal papers and desperate plans. The table was scarred now from years of use, marked by countless family meals and homework sessions and late-night conversations. But it was still the heart of their home, the place where their love had first been declared. "I have been thinking about that first week," Preston said, taking Helena's hands across the table just as he had a decade earlier. "About how terrified I was that I would not be able to help you, that we would lose everything." "We did not lose," Helena reminded him, squeezing his fingers. "We won, we fought, and we won." "We did more than win," Preston said, his voice thick with emotion. "We built something beautiful. Look at what we have created together, Helena. This is not just your father's ranch anymore. This is ours, our home, our family, our legacy, and it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I love you," Helena said simply. "I loved you then when we were fighting for survival. I love you now when we are building for the future. And I will love you always, until the day I die and beyond." Preston kissed her then, and it felt just like that first kiss. A promise, a beginning, a declaration of forever. Outside, their children played in the yard of the ranch that had been worth fighting for. The cattle grazed on land that remained in family hands. The creek flowed freely, its water rights protected by law and love. And the railroad ran along the southern boundary, a reminder of the battle they had won, and the life they had claimed for themselves against all odds. In the years that followed, Helena and Preston became pillars of the Piach community. They helped other ranchers fight unfair claims. They donated to the school and the church. They opened their home to travelers and neighbors in need. Their generosity and kindness became as well known as their skill at ranching. But their greatest legacy was the love they shared, a love that had been forged in crisis and tempered by years of partnership. It was a love that their children and grandchildren would remember and try to emulate, a love that became part of the family story passed down through generations. Helena Zimmerman, who had stood alone on a porch reading a telegram that threatened to destroy her world, had not just survived. She had thrived. She had fought back against injustice and won. She had found love in the most unexpected place. And she had built a life that honored her father's memory while creating new memories for her own family. Preston Brooks, who had been running from pain and fear, had found the courage to stop running. He had found a cause worth fighting for, and a woman worth loving. He had become the man he always wanted to be, strong, honorable, protective, and deeply loved. Together, they proved that love and justice could triumph over greed and power. They proved that two people working together could accomplish what seemed impossible alone. And they proved that sometimes, the worst moments in life can lead to the greatest blessings, if you are brave enough to fight for them. As they grew old together, still working the ranch side by side even as their children took over more of the daily operations, Helena and Preston never forgot that first terrible, wonderful week when a telegram and a stranger on horseback had changed everything. They treasured the memory of those early days, the fear and uncertainty, the desperation and hope, because those experiences had shaped them into the people they became. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch they had sat on so many times before, watching the sun set over land they had fought to keep, and had succeeded in making truly their own. They would hold hands, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of partnership, and remember how close they had come to losing it all. But they had not lost. They had won. And the victory was sweeter because it had been hard-won, because they had claimed it together, because it represented not just land and water rights but love and partnership, and a future they had built with their own hands and hearts. The ranch that Helena's father had carved from the Nevada wilderness remained in family hands, generation after generation. The story of how Helena and Preston had fought the railroad, and one became family legend, told and retold until every detail was burnished bright with time. And at the center of that story was always the same truth, that love and courage can triumph over any obstacle, that partnership makes us stronger than we could ever be alone, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Years later, when Helena was in her 60s and Preston's hair had gone silver, they stood together at William's wedding. Their son was marrying a strong, intelligent woman who reminded Helena powerfully of herself at that age. As they watched the young couple exchange vows, Helena felt Preston's hand find hers, their fingers interlacing with the automatic ease of decades of touch. "Remember our wedding," Preston murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Every detail," Helena replied. "You were so nervous you dropped the ring." "I was terrified I would mess it up somehow," Preston admitted. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I could not believe you actually wanted to marry me." "I still cannot believe I got so lucky," Helena said, turning to look at her husband. His face was lined now, weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes were the same whiskey gold that had captivated her from the beginning. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Preston Brooks." "I love you," Preston said simply. "Then, now, always." "Always," Helena echoed and meant it with every fiber of her being. As the celebration continued around them, Helena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The telegram that had seemed like a death sentence had actually been the beginning of her true life. The fight against the railroad had brought Preston to her door and had taught her that she was stronger than she knew. The years of hard work and partnership had built not just a prosperous ranch, but a family and a legacy that would endure long after she and Preston were gone. She thought about her father, buried on the hill overlooking the creek he had loved. She hoped he was proud of what she had done with his legacy, how she had protected it and expanded it and filled it with love. She hoped he knew that she had kept her promise, that the ranch remained in family hands, thriving and growing with each generation. But most of all, she was grateful. Grateful for Preston's love and partnership. Grateful for their children and grandchildren. Grateful for the life they had built together from nothing but determination and hope. Grateful that she had been brave enough to fight when it mattered most, and wise enough to accept help when it was offered. The ranch that had almost been stolen by the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad Company stood as a testament to courage, love, and the power of two people working together toward a common goal. It was a place of happiness and security, of hard work and deep satisfaction, of family ties and enduring love. And it all began with a telegram, a terrified woman standing on a porch, and a cowboy who chose to stop and stay instead of riding on. From those simple elements, an entire life had been built, a love story that would echo through generations, inspiring others to fight for what they believed in and to never give up on the possibility of love, even in the darkest moments. As the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their lives, Helena and Preston stood together as they always had, facing whatever came next with courage and love and the unshakable certainty that together they could overcome anything. The ranch that had been threatened was now secure. The love that had bloomed in crisis had deepened into something unbreakable, and the future stretched before them, bright with promise and full of the hope that comes from a life well lived and love well earned. Their story was one of triumph over adversity, of love conquering fear, of two souls finding each other at exactly the right moment and building something beautiful together. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. And most importantly, it was true. Helena Zimmerman and Preston Brooks had fought the railroad and won. But more than that, they had found each other and in doing so had found everything that truly mattered: love, partnership, family, and home. The Wild West had tested them, challenged them, and forged them into something stronger than they could have been alone. And they had emerged victorious, not just in the courtroom but in life itself, creating a legacy that would endure long after the last train had passed through the Nevada desert and the Old West had faded into memory and myth.